Hi, Taylor T. Carlson back with another video for you. We're going back to Marvel's canon Star Wars comics today, and we're going to be taking a look at this. This is the Heroes for a New Hope hardcover combined volumes. This combines the 5-issue miniseries of Princess Leia, Lando, and Chewbacca. These were released at various times in 2015 and early 2016, with them getting their own trade paperback combined editions before they were all combined into this hardcover volume. Each of these stories is set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, which at this point seemed to be the main era that Marvel was focusing on with these stories, likely because they wanted to have some degree of crossovers with characters and plot lines. For this review, I'm going to be going through each of these three stories, giving a plot summary as well as my opinions and overall review for each of the tales. And as such, naturally, there will be spoilers here, so if you haven't read any of these comics, I would strongly recommend that you come back and watch this video after you have read them. The first comic featured in here is the Princess Leia comic. This takes place literally where A New Hope ends, because you still see them on stage in the Yavin 4 temple getting medals, and then Leia, of course, is mourning over her home planet of Alderaan, which was destroyed by the Death Star before the rebels were finally able to blow up the station. She decides she wants to keep her people's heritage alive, so she steals a ship from the rebellion, goes off into space with a fellow Alderaanian who's part of the rebellion, and they decide they're going to try to get together as many surviving people from the planet as they can to keep their heritage alive and eventually start a new world. This comic, the first time I read it, I honestly was not too thrilled with it. I thought it was very talky, and there are a few places where the artwork is actually really laughably bad. However, even if it does get off to a slow start, this is actually a pretty good comic overall. Ultimately, Leia deals with a lot of dissent, not only from the Empire, but also her fellow surviving Alderaanians, who at this point don't totally know what's going on and certainly aren't trustworthy, knowing that their world has been destroyed. There are traitors and spies around every corner, and Leia does what she can to try to bring things together and, of course, eventually return to the rebellion. Ultimately, even though there's a lot of struggles, a lot of attacks from the Empire, she manages to rally a lot of the survivors, and just when it looks like the Empire has her cornered, many ships filled with people who are loyal to Leia show up and announce their loyalty. Overall, I would say that this is a good story. It's not one of my favorites in the new canon, but it's definitely better than a lot of the stories that Marvel has published since they regained the Star Wars license. The second comic that's featured in this volume is the Lando comic. This is not to be confused with the later Lando Double or Nothing comic, which was actually a prequel to the Solo film. This comic, like the others in this set, is set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, so this is before Lando really encounters the rebellion and becomes a part of their crusade. At this point, Lando, despite his best efforts, he and his best friend Lobot are deep in debt, and they're looking for a way out. Lando's attempts to do so far haven't been too successful, but a crime boss offers him an interesting prospect. He and a crew can steal a spaceship from an unguarded Imperial installation and return it to him for a substantial payday. Additionally, they can keep all of the treasures that they find on board. It sounds like a pretty sweet deal, and they go out and, of course, steal the spaceship, but what they don't know is it's actually Emperor Palpatine's spaceship, and he isn't too happy to lose his beloved spacecraft, let alone to a sly smuggler like Lando. It isn't long before everyone on board is in danger because of Sith artifacts that have corrupted royal guards and eventually begin corrupting Lando's crew, and it's not long before all hell breaks loose. The Emperor also sends a bounty hunter to reclaim the ship or destroy it and all the Sith artifacts on board. What Palpatine doesn't know is that the bounty hunter is an old girlfriend of sorts of Lando, so she eventually gets on the spaceship, and it's not long before the self-destruct has been initiated and they've got no way out. Ultimately, Lando's friend Lobot has to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to save his friends. Lando's always been a personal favorite character of mine. He's a scoundrel, and that's why we love him. You see him here in typical Lando fashion, trying to talk his way out of a dilemma, doing what's necessary, ultimately having to make a lot of hard decisions here. There are definitely some very funny parts in this comic because of the kind of guy Lando is, but the biggest surprise here is how much they're able to flesh out Lobot, who is largely just a mute background character in The Empire Strikes Back. He's also been somewhat revisited in the relaunched Star Wars main series comic, which is set between Empire and Jedha. You'll never watch Empire Strikes Back the same way again after you see Lobot's backstory here and everything that he did to help his friend. We also get a little more of a look into certain Sith artifacts, including some stuff that also appears in the second volume of Darth Vader. Of the three comics that are featured here, this is by far the best of the three. If you're at all a Star Wars fan, if you're at all a Lando Calrissian fan, I don't think you will at all be disappointed with this comic. The third and final comic in here is the Chewbacca comic. This also is set between New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and it sees Chewbacca crash landing on a world when his spaceship fails, and he ends up meeting up with a young girl who has escaped from slavery, being that she and her father were in debt. Ultimately, she manages to convince Chewbacca to help fight for the planet and get rid of these slavers who have taken over and done a lot of harm to her people. What they don't know is that the slave master in question has made a deal with the Empire, and they're coming with plenty of scout walkers, doing what's necessary to get the natural resources from the planet and keep everyone in line. Ultimately, Chewbacca and his new friend here have to come up with a plan that will enable them to sabotage the Empire and ultimately move their operations away. Needless to say, they do manage to do it because, of course, Chewbacca has to be around for the later movies and stories in which he's still alive. As much as I love the character of Chewbacca, he really works best as a sidekick, and unfortunately, he can't really carry his own comic. Even here, he finds himself playing second fiddle to Zaro, the young girl that he sets out to help, and it doesn't help that the art style in this comic for human characters is not very good. The artist makes all the human characters look like Hispanics. I don't know if this was deliberate, but not just the people on the planet, but even the Imperial officers even look that way. One of the biggest disappointments, too, is the design of the young girl, Zara, who Chewbacca befriends. I mean, she doesn't even look female. She looks more like Reese from Malcolm in the Middle. Ultimately, this comic is kind of a disappointment. There are a few decent parts. I like how they do poke some fun at how Chewbacca doesn't speak the basic language, but what it all comes down to is one of the more mediocre and forgettable stories in Marvel's new Star Wars comic canon. In addition to the stories themselves, this hardbound volume does feature a few bonus pages which have some of the variant covers from the individual releases of the comics. I mean, there's several of them in there. I'm not going to show them all off in this review, but that's certainly a more pleasant alternative than having to hunt down a bunch of variant covers for your collection, which are usually vastly overpriced. Have you had a chance to read any of these three Star Wars comics or pick up this hardbound volume? What is your opinion of these stories? Are these some of your favorites? Is there one you like more than the others? Comment down below and let me know what you think. Also remember to subscribe to my channel and give this video a like if you found it helpful. I'm Taylor T. Carlson, and I'll see you in my next Star Wars comic review.